In season 2 of Jujutsu Kaisen, the main storyline takes place from 2006 to 2018, and today I'm explaining everything you need to know in around 30 minutes or less. To start things off, the timeline begins with a flashback to when Gojo was only 16, and at this age his skills were nothing compared to the guy we know from season 1. For example, Teen Gojo didn't have a domain expansion, he didn't know how to heal with reverse curse technique, meaning he also couldn't do curse technique reversal or hollow purple. Now, despite all that, he was still the strongest pupil at Jujutsu High, alongside his classmate Suguru Geto. Unlike Gojo, Geto came from a regular family of non-sorcerers, but by some miracle he was born with arguably the most adaptable curse technique in history. The name of this power was Curse Spirit Manipulation, and it gave Suguru potential to absorb an infinite number of curses, including powerful special grades, and then control them like his own personal army. Although the technique has some drawbacks that we'll explain later on, for now all we need to focus on is the process of absorbing curses. According to Geto, each curse tasted like a rag used to clean up vomit, but there were two reasons why he was willing to make this sacrifice. Reason 1, Suguru believed that in society the strong should protect the weak, hence why he wanted to use his ability to protect non-sorcerers. Reason 2, even though no one could relate to his experience of eating curses, his friendship with Gojo meant that Geto never really felt alone. Sadly, one day all of this began to fall apart when the students were sent on a mission to rescue this teenage girl. In the world of Jujutsu, Riko Amanai had various assassins trying to kill her, and to understand why, there's a bit of ancient history we have to know. At least 1500 years ago, but possibly even earlier than that, a sorcerer called Tengen was born with a technique that made her immortal. The downside to this immortality was that she still grew old like a normal person, and eventually that became a problem. After 500 years of aging, her technique started evolving her into something not human, and this was bad because if the transformation was complete, then she might lose control and destroy mankind in the process. Therefore, to prevent that from happening, once every 500 years, Tengen would reset the age of her body by merging with someone else. These mergers are what have allowed her to stay human for so long, but importantly, it can't just be done with any random person. To merge with Tengen, a person needs to have compatible DNA, and this rare type of individual is known as a star plasma vessel. In 2006, Riko was the vessel of this generation, although like I said, there were assassins trying to get rid of her. The first group of assassins was an organization named Q, who were trying to change Jujutsu society by forcing Tengen to evolve. By contrast, the second group trying to kill Riko was the Time Vessel Association, who were mainly non-sorcerers that worshipped Tengen. To be specific, followers of this religion thought that Tengen was a god, and they didn't want their god to become tainted by merging with a regular human. For that reason, the group hired an assassin called Toji Fushiguro, whose job was to terminate Riko before the merger could happen. An interesting fact about Toji is that his dad used to be the leader of the Zenin clan, but Toji himself left the family after suffering from years of abuse. From a young age, the Zenin bullied him due to his lack of talent, since he was the only known person on Earth to have no cursed energy. Generally speaking, the top sorcerers have mountains of cursed energy, while even non-sorcerers have tiny amounts. So yeah, Toji was just an embarrassment to the clan. However, what the Zenin failed to appreciate is that in exchange for zero cursed energy, Toji was blessed with superhuman strength and sharp senses that enabled him to see curses. These gifts made him incredibly dangerous, but to kill Riko, he still had to get past the strongest sorcerer team. Within hours of being given their mission, Geto saved Riko from Q's assassination attempt, while Gojo defeated their best soldier and caused the group to break up. From here, the plan was to safely bring Riko to Jujutsu High, but things began to go wrong when she chose to visit her school friends one last time. The reason this was even allowed was because Tengen gave orders to do anything Riko wants, since the merger wasn't scheduled to happen for 2 more days. Now, predictably, while at school she was targeted by assassins again, only this time the killers were recruited by Toji. As part of his master plan, he knew that if Gojo was at full strength, then it'd be impossible to get close to his target. That's why, to reduce Gojo's stamina, he offered 30 million yen to anyone who could kill the girl within 2 days. The genius of this plan is that firstly, you get a bunch of people fighting for you, and you don't even have to pay them since they're guaranteed to lose. Secondly, the existence of the bounty itself made Gojo paranoid, to the point where he didn't sleep for 2 nights out of concern for Riko's safety. This meant by the day of the merger he was exhausted, and when the bounty finally expired, he thought it was safe to let his guard down. That mistake is how Toji was able to catch him by surprise in this scene, and after a very tactical fight, Gojo dies. At the same time, deep below Jujutsu High, Riko was almost ready to do the merger, but at the very last second she was given a choice. As we know, being the Star Plasma Vessel is a big sacrifice because you're essentially asking a child to give up their whole life so that Tengen gets a new body. From the start, Gojo and Geto weren't the biggest fans of this idea, and they agreed to support Riko and possibly even fight Tengen if she decided not to merge. When presented with the option to have a normal life, an emotional Riko did choose to go back home. However, the moment was ruined when Toji showed up and killed her. Yeah, this guy is just really good at his job. What followed this was an epic battle between Geto and the assassin, and during this fight we saw one of the drawbacks of cursed spirit manipulation. For context, one reason why Toji was such a great hitman is that he had a one-of-a-kind collection of weapons that could negate cursed techniques, boost his own strength, and cut directly into the soul. These tools were all stored inside of a small cursed spirit that he tamed, but from Geto's perspective, he assumed that he'd be able to absorb it. Sadly, what he didn't know at the time is that in rare cases where a cursed spirit has a master, the curse can only be absorbed once the master is defeated. Due to this miscalculation, he got ripped apart by Toji, and the only reason he wasn't killed is because if he died, all of the curses inside him would be released. Understandably, Toji didn't want to deal with that, and so he left Jujutsu High with Riko's dead body and brought her to the Time Vessel Association. There he received the money they owed him plus a bonus on top, but on the way out he was confronted by Gojo. As it turns out, when Satoru was on the verge of death, he put everything he had into learning reverse curse technique. Quick reminder, reverse curse technique is when you multiply negative curse energy with more negative energy to create a positive energy that can repair the body and fuel curse techniques. With his life on the line, Gojo finally realized how to do this, allowing him to heal from his injuries and awaken a new level of Jujutsu. This upgrade is how he was able to destroy Toji with Hollow Purple, although before the assassin died, he revealed something interesting. For context, 4 years earlier, Toji's wife gave birth to a son called Megami, but she died shortly after he was born. Her death basically led to Toji spiraling out of control, and so to make some money, he agreed to sell his son to the Zenin clan. The deal was that Megami would be handed to them once his curse technique appears, but deep down, Toji knew it'd be an awful place to grow up. That's why, with the final chance to fix his mistake, he told Gojo about the situation, hoping he might interfere. Now, switching back to Geto, after regaining consciousness, he also went to the Time Vessel Association, where Riko's murder was being celebrated by the followers. In this moment, Gojo was tempted to just wipe out everyone there, but it was Suguru who convinced him there was no point. Even though Geto was equally disgusted by these people, killing them would have gone against his belief that sorcerers should protect the weak. That said, because of everything that happened on this mission, his beliefs and his life would drastically change over the next year. For instance, now that Gojo had surpassed him by learning reverse curse technique, the two friends stopped working as a team. Instead, Satoru went on missions alone since he didn't need any help, leaving Geto to deal with other less important threats by himself. Gradually, this led to his mental health falling off a cliff, given that most days he was just on his own eating curses, and he began to question why he was even doing this. Originally, his main aim was to protect non-sorcerers, but from experience, he now knew that many of these people didn't deserve it. Then, at the height of his depression, Suguru had a life-changing conversation with Yuki Sakumo. Back in 2007, Yuki was the most powerful sorcerer besides Gojo, and her dream was to create a world with no cursed spirits. If you've seen my video explaining season 1 of JJK, you know that spirits are born from cursed energy that leaks out of normal people. Therefore, Yuki theorized that to stop curses being born, you have to somehow remove cursed energy from the world so that everyone becomes like Toji, or you teach mankind to control cursed energy, thereby preventing any leaks. During this discussion, Geto realized that a third option would just be to exterminate all non-sorcerers, and Yuki even admitted this might be an easier way. As a side note, something else she revealed was that despite Riko's merger not happening, Tengen hadn't become a threat to humanity like they feared. Shortly after this meeting, a young Jujutsu High student called Haibara was killed on a mission, with Nanami narrowly escaping, and once again, Suguru questioned if all this suffering was worth it just to protect non-sorcerers. In September of 2007, Geto then finally snapped, massacring an entire village of non-sorcerers, with the exception of 2 young girls who were able to see curses. After this day, he raised them like they were his own kids, while abandoning any ties that he had to Jujutsu High. When confronted about this by Gojo, Suguru explained that his vision was to build a society where only sorcerers exist, and he knew it was possible because Gojo himself has the potential to do it. In other words, if Geto could be as strong as Gojo, then it'd be pretty easy for him to wipe out non-sorcerers, so the fact it can be done is why Suguru wanted to give it his best try. Following this, the two friends then went their separate ways, with Satoru eventually going on to cancel the deal that Toji made with the Zenin. Instead, he made arrangements so that Megumi and his stepsister were taken care of, as he planned to develop Fushiguro into a powerful ally. Meanwhile, Geto used brute force to take over what remained of the Time Vessel Association. This move gave him access to huge financial resources, and for years he gathered followers who shared his beliefs. In 2017, Geto and his minions then took the first step towards eradicating non-sorcerers, and if you want to know how that ended, I'd recommend watching my breakdown of the Jujutsu Kaisen movie. For everyone else, let's flash forward by 10 months to when Gojo sent his students on a mission. In case you forgot, at the end of season 1, Satoru believed there was a traitor at Jujutsu High, given that Mahito's group clearly had access to inside information. After looking into it, the prime suspect was identified as Mekamaru, who was a student that we first met during the Goodwill event. Back then, Mekamaru, whose real name is Kokichi Muta, revealed that he lived in constant pain, couldn't use his legs, and had skin so sensitive that it would sting if light touched it. For that reason, his real body never leaves his secret base, however, his technique allows him to communicate through these puppets. The mission for Megumi's class was to ask the real Kokichi some questions, but when they arrived, it was clear he'd sent them to a fake location. By itself, this showed he had something to hide, and at Mekamaru's actual base, he received a visit from Geto and Mahito. It turns out that months earlier, these three had made a binding vow, which is an unbreakable contract between sorcerers. The deal was that Kokichi would gather intel for them using his puppets, explaining how the curses knew where and when to find Gojo in season 1. In exchange, Mahito agreed to fully heal Mekamaru, which is something only he can do. Remember, because Kokichi was born with a heavenly restriction, it's not like you can fix him with reverse curse technique, otherwise the school could have done it a long time ago. Mahito is different because his technique lets him reshape the soul, and with a single touch, he turned Mekamaru into peak physical condition. Now, you might be wondering, why did they try to kill each other right after this? And the answer comes down to Kokichi himself. Unlike the other humans who work with Mahito, Kokichi was never evil. In fact, he openly said that he thinks of Mahito as scum. To him, all that mattered was getting healthy so he could finally meet his friends, especially Miwa, meaning the binding vow was purely business. As soon as Mahito healed him, it meant the vow was now complete, and from this moment, both sides were free to act how they wanted. In an ideal world, this is when Mekamaru would have escaped to warn Gojo about the villain's plans, but Geto prevented that by surrounding the whole area in a curtain. Quick reminder, a curtain is a barrier made from cursed energy, which can be used to stop people from coming in and also to stop people from escaping. Geto's barrier left Kokichi with no choice but to stay and fight, and to make things worse, he couldn't call for help since curtains do interfere with signals. Now, by himself, the odds of Mekamaru beating a special grade curse and special grade sorcerer were low. In fact, Geto felt so unthreatened that he didn't even bother to fight. Instead, he just let Mahito have some fun, and to be fair, Kokichi's strategies did at least make things interesting. However, one thing we should never forget is that at any time, Geto could have summoned many more special grade curses, and it was his decision to hold back and do nothing that made it seem like Kokichi had a chance. In reality, he was never going to escape, and after Mahito killed him, he confirmed that the battle looked more dangerous than it was. With Mekamaru being dead, there was now no one left who could spoil their plans, and I'm going to take a quick second to explain what their plan is. In season 1, we learned that the goal of Mahito's group is for curses to replace humans as the dominant life forms on the planet. To make that happen, they first had to get rid of Satoru Gojo, because as long as he's around, it's impossible for curses to take over. Originally, Jogo didn't believe this, which is why he personally tried to kill Gojo himself, but after this beatdown, they realized he was invincible. That's why, instead of trying to kill Satoru, Geto proposed that they seal him away. To be specific, in Geto's possession was an object known as the Prison Realm that can seal anyone inside as long as you satisfy two conditions that we'll discuss later. For now, all we need to know is that to make the Prison Realm work, the curses had to create a situation where Gojo was isolated, distracted, and couldn't use his full power. This is what brings us to Shibuya on the night of October 31st, when thousands of people were in the area to celebrate Halloween. At exactly 7 PM, Mahito's group put up a massive curtain that trapped these civilians inside, and a side effect of the barrier was that phone signals were also blocked. Now, at first, people didn't really notice anything was wrong since the barrier was invisible to most non-sorcerers. As time went on though, more and more civilians realized they couldn't leave, and without signal there wasn't a way to call for help. Then, according to this random guy, people were told that their only way to escape was to bring Satoru Gojo to Shibuya. Obviously, no one here knows who Gojo is, but in order to escape, they went up to the edge of the curtain and started calling his name. When Jujutsu High heard about this, the higher-ups told Satoru to fix the problem himself, and at 8:31 PM he finally arrived at the scene. The nature of this curtain meant that even though civilians were trapped, sorcerers could freely enter and leave as many times as they wanted. Speaking of sorcerers, outside the barrier were 4 separate teams sent by Jujutsu HQ, whose mission for now was to do nothing. Moving on, 7 minutes after arriving, Gojo noticed that the villains had created a new curtain inside of Shibuya's train station. Just like the curtain above ground, the new barrier also trapped non-sorcerers. In particular, it trapped them around the train platform. This meant that if Satoru was to go down there, he'd be totally surrounded by people from all sides, and therefore couldn't use red, blue, or hollow purple. On top of that, he also couldn't use a domain expansion, since anyone in his domain would be finished, and anyone outside his domain would get crushed in between his barrier and the barrier that surrounds the train platform. In other words, this new curtain was clearly a trap to limit Gojo's power, and even though he knew this, he still went down there to protect the civilians. At 8:40 PM, he was then confronted by Jogo, Hanami, and Chozo, who began wiping out non-sorcerers right in front of him. The purpose of them doing this was to create a big distraction, as they wanted all of Satoru's focus to be on saving lives and fighting curses. As long as they could keep that up for at least 20 minutes, then Geto promised them he'd handle everything else. Unfortunately, over half an hour later, Geto still hadn't shown up, and by this point, Gojo had crushed Hanami to death. At the same time, Jogo was incredibly stressed out, and he only managed to survive by running away and hiding in the crowd. The reason Geto hadn't arrived yet is that he felt like Satoru was still too relaxed, but this began to change when a train pulled up to the platform. On this train was Mahito and 1,000 transfigured humans who were all normal people that were turned into monsters by his technique. In the chaos that followed, dozens of non-sorcerers were slaughtered by the transfigured humans, putting Gojo in a tricky situation. On one hand, he could activate his domain expansion, which would allow him to easily kill Mahito, Jogo, and all of the transfigured humans. However, the downside is that it'd sacrifice all of the civilians around him, which is something Gojo wasn't prepared to do. This is why Satoru was forced to get creative, and for the first time ever, he expanded his domain for only 0.2 seconds. As we know, usually Infinite Void floods the brain with unlimited information, but since the domain was so quick, the info sent to people's brains was only around 6 months worth. This was enough to paralyze every human without giving them permanent damage, but Gojo believed that the curses might wake up at any time. Therefore, rather than getting into a fight with them, he decided to put all of his efforts into destroying the transfigured humans. For 5 minutes straight, Gojo then went on a rampage as he killed roughly 3 or 4 transfigured humans per second. Understandably, after doing all of that, I don't think anyone could say he was relaxed, making this the perfect time for Geto to use the prison realm. I mentioned earlier that this object has 2 conditions to work, which are 1, the target has to be within 4 meters of the prison realm, and 2, the target has to stay there for a minute, or to put it another way, 60 seconds worth of information has to flow into the target's brain. That's why, immediately after throwing the prison realm near Gojo, Geto then finally made his appearance. Remember, the last time these two saw each other was nearly a year earlier when Satoru killed him during the events of the JJK movie. That's why to see Geto now just standing here was a massive shock, and more than that, it caused years worth of memories to flow through Gojo's mind. This amount of memories easily surpassed the 1-minute rule for the prison realm, and just like that, Satoru was trapped by this special grade object. Interestingly though, just before he was sealed, we learned some crucial information about how Geto is still around. It turns out that after Gojo had killed his best friend, he didn't give the body to Shoko, who's the doctor at Jujutsu High. Back in 2006, Shoko was their classmate at the school, so it's possible out of compassion for her he didn't want her to deal with Tsuguru's corpse. That's just one theory. I mean, another theory is that he didn't want Geto to be dissected, but the point is that Geto's body was never cremated. This gave an opening for someone else to steal the body, and what's crazy is that we already knew about the person who did it. If you saw my video explaining the first season, then you'll remember a sorcerer called Noritoshi Kamo, who was the mad scientist that created the half-human, half-curse hybrids. One of this scientist's curse techniques was the ability to take over another person's body by literally switching brains. By switching places with Geto, Noritoshi gained the ability to use curse spirit manipulation, which was essential for his own secret plans. Now, while all of this was going on, one of the 4 sorcerer teams was already on their way to Gojo's location. This team consisted of the grade 1 sorcerer Mei, her younger brother Wee, and also Yuji was third wheeling. Unlike the other teams who were told to do nothing, Mei's team was already busy dealing with curses and transfigured humans at a place called Meiji Shrine Station. Meiji Shrine Station is just one stop away from Shibuya, and it's where Mahito was before he hopped on the train full of transfigured humans. Since then, Mei's team had been running in that same direction, but when Gojo was sealed, Yuji was suddenly contacted by Mekamaru. By combining technology with Jujutsu, Kokichi wrote a program before his death that would only activate if Gojo was sealed. The end result was these AI-like robots that contained his memories, and for a limited time they were able to talk. After convincing Mei's team that he was actually on their side, Mekamaru revealed that there was now a new curtain surrounding Shibuya Station. Importantly, this new barrier stopped all sorcerers from getting in, meaning it was impossible for Mei's team to reach Gojo. For that reason, Yuji headed back up to the surface, as his mission was to destroy this new curtain while also gathering allies. Meanwhile, inside of Shibuya Station, the villains had a polite disagreement over what they should do next. From Jogo's point of view, to create a world where curses are on top, it was necessary to bring Sukuna back to life. The general idea was that Sukuna is so evil and so chaotic that if he took control of Yuji, it could be the end of modern civilization. By contrast, Mahito and Chozo both wanted to kill Yuji for their own personal reasons. In Mahito's case, he believed that with or without Sukuna, the curses are still strong enough to overthrow humanity. Therefore, it doesn't really matter if Itadori lives or dies, and following their previous encounter, Mahito just really wanted to kill him. Meanwhile, in Chozo's case, he wanted to kill Yuji to avenge his brothers, who were finished off last season by Gojo students. After failing to agree, the curses each ran off to find Itadori themselves, and whoever found him first would get to decide his fate. Speaking of Yuji, by now he teamed up with Ino, who's a grade 2 sorcerer, and Megumi to take down the curtain that blocks sorcerers. For context, the source of this curtain was these 3 talismans, which were being protected by Granny Ogami and Jiro Awasaka. Back in the 80s, these two used Jujutsu to enjoy successful careers as criminals, but everything went downhill for them after Gojo was born. As the strongest sorcerer by far, his existence forced people like this to lie low, as they knew they could never stand up to him. That's why they partnered with Geto, aka Noritoshi Kamo, cause by sealing Gojo away, it'd allow them to freely act as criminals once again. That said, thanks to Megumi's high battle IQ, he and Yuji were able to beat Jiro despite his tricky curse technique. In the process, the final talismans were now destroyed, and at 10:04 PM, the curtain blocking sorcerers came down. Now, this should have been a great moment, but unfortunately, it got overshadowed by Ino almost dying. To cut a long story short, Granny Ogami's technique is one that gives her or someone else the option to shapeshift into another person. Crucially though, that other person has to be dead, and in this case, Ogami transformed her grandson into Toji Zenin. This gave her grandson all of Toji's physical attributes, and within seconds he pulverized Ino and threw him off a building. With Ino being down, that forced the sorcerers to kind of rethink their next move, with Megumi leaving to get Ino some help, while Yuji headed to Shibuya Station alone. What's unlucky is the second he arrived, Chozo was right there, instantly beginning their fight to the death. When it comes to Chozo, his curse technique is blood manipulation, which you might have noticed is the exact same as Noritoshi from the Kyoto school. However, the main difference between them is that because Chozo is half human and half cursed spirit, he doesn't run out of blood. As long as there's cursed energy in his system, he can generate blood forever, meaning his attacks can be more adventurous than Noritoshi. On top of that, he's just a more naturally talented sorcerer, and throughout his fight with Itadori, he quickly adapted and countered Yuji's tactics. After knocking him unconscious, Chozo had the chance to then kill Itadori, but at the last moment he felt something. A side effect of his technique is that he can immediately sense when his brothers have died, and with Yuji on death's door, Chozo had that exact same sensation. By default, this means that somehow, someway, Itadori is his younger brother, but in this moment he didn't know how to make sense of that. That's why he just kinda ran away screaming, and as he left the area, Yuji's body was found by Mimiko and Nanako. These are the twin sorcerers who were raised by Geto, but before we get into why they're here, let's switch over to Nanami. Right now, his intention was to reach the platform where Gojo was sealed, because thanks to Mekamaru, they knew the prison realm was still there. Tagging along with Nanami was Maki and Naobito Zenin, who's a grade 1 sorcerer and the current head of the Zenin clan. As head of the family, he was the one who made the deal to buy Megami, so as you can imagine, he's not the biggest fan of Gojo. Despite that, he was still with them as they went to go save him, but on the way there, the group encountered a special grade curse. Out of the 4 cursed spirits in Mahito's group, Dagon was easily the weakest, but in this scene it was his hatred of humans and his anger at Hanami's death that helped him to evolve into his true form. Like this, he was strong enough to take them on by himself, but the sorcerers worked hard to prevent him opening his domain. In particular, Naobito's projection sorcery caused a lot of trouble, and it's worth taking a second to explain how this works. When activated, Naobito has to think of 24 unique movements in his mind, and then his technique makes it all happen within a single second. Likewise, when he touches an opponent, they also have to think of 24 unique movements, and if those movements aren't performed, the victim gets trapped inside a frame for 1 second instead. Anyway, after a big struggle, Dagon does eventually open his domain. However, things kind of go off script when Megami shows up to open his. As we know, when 2 domains are open at the same time, they fight for control until the strongest domain takes over. In this situation, it's clear that Dagon's domain was more refined, but Megami wasn't actually trying to win. Instead, he only opened his domain to create this hole at the edge of Dagon's barrier, giving the sorcerers a way to escape. The problem though is that he couldn't maintain the hole for very long, and before they could leave, Toji suddenly entered. For context, when Granny Ogami used her technique, her grandson was only meant to inherit Toji's appearance and physical strength. This was supposed to continue until her grandson had no cursed energy left, but the issue is that Toji's body never had any to begin with. Consequently, the normal rules of her technique didn't apply, leading to a few glitches. The first glitch was that her grandson's soul disappeared, as it got overwritten by the pure instincts of Toji's body. Essentially, this meant he became a mindless killing machine that simply wanted to fight the strongest person around. The second glitch is that there was no time limit due to there being no cursed energy involved, and in theory he could keep fighting forever, at least until someone beats him. With that explained, the ghost of Toji entered Dagon's domain, and with a small assist from Naobito, he casually finished off this special grade curse. Following that, his attention immediately turned to Megami, not because it's his son, but because Fushiguro was the next strongest person to fight. By this point, Nanami and Naobito were heavily injured, and so they got ignored as Toji brought Megami outside the station. At the same time, Jogo showed up right after they left, and as revenge for what happened to Dagon, he cooked Maki and both of the grade 1 sorcerers alive. In fact, in this scene, it looked like he planned to burn Naobito for a second time, but before that could happen, he felt Sukuna's presence. To be specific, he actually sent Sukuna's finger, and that's because Mimiko and Nanako had just fed one to Yuji. Their motivation in doing this was to ask Sukuna for a favor, as they needed someone on his level to kill the fake Geto. Him being dead would allow them to get their master's body back, since they never really agreed with it being used in this way. Now, within seconds of feeding Yuji, Jogo then appeared, and he came armed with 10 of Sukuna's fingers. Many of these fingers were the ones they stole from Jujutsu High, and by giving all of them to Yuji at once, the King of Curses was able to gain temporary control. One of the first things he did was to slice up Mimiko and Nanako for trying to negotiate, but with Jogo he had a lot more patience. This is because Jogo didn't ask him to do anything, rather he simply suggested that Sukuna could take permanent control of Yuji by making a binding vow. Crucially, what Jogo wasn't aware of is that last season these two already made a binding vow that would allow Sukuna to take over when he felt the time was right. For that reason, he wasn't interested in Jogo's proposal, but to show his appreciation for the fingers, he offered the cursed spirit a deal. The agreement was that if Jogo could land a single hit on Sukuna, then he'd help them massacre every human in Shibuya, except for one. What followed this was equal to a natural disaster, as Jogo literally melted and tore apart the city trying to land a hit. During this carnage, he used every move at his disposal except his domain, cause after losing to Gojo last time, he basically had PTSD. That said, nothing he did this time was enough to hit Sukuna, and when the King of Curses whipped out his own flames, that was pretty much game over. This fire is an aspect of Sukuna's technique not explained in Season 2, but based on what he said, we know it's a power he's obviously used in the past that he assumed was well known by sorcerers. After using his flames to burn Jogo to a crisp, Sukuna then sensed there was something wrong with Megami. To understand why, let's flash back to his fight with Toji as he hunted his only child across Shibuya. It's worth pointing out that because Toji was such an absent father when he was alive, Megumi didn't recognize him, and likewise, this glitched out version of Toji also didn't recognize his son. However, in the end, after nearly killing Megumi several times, Toji's ghost finally made the connection, and he was actually happy to find out that his son didn't join the Zenin clan. Following that, he offed himself to prevent any more violence, but as Megumi left the area, he was ambushed by Haruta. Quick reminder, Haruta is a longtime member of Mahito's group and a person who exclusively likes to fight weaker opponents. Earlier that same night, he attacked Kugisaki, Ajichi, and other minor characters, but was beaten to a pulp when an actual grade 1 sorcerer showed up. Having woken up from that, Megumi was his first victim, and considering what he went through, with opening his domain and fighting Toji, he just didn't have the strength to fight back. At the same time, Fushiguro didn't want to just die for nothing, and so he decided to at least take Haruta down with him. As we know, Megumi's curse technique gives him access to 10 Shikigami, but in order to control them, they first have to be tamed in a ritual. Throughout history, Mahoraga is the one Shikigami that's never been tamed by anyone, and that's because it has the ability to adapt to anything. The only way to kill this monster is to destroy it with an attack it's never seen, and by starting the ritual with Haruta nearby, it forced him to also fight this thing. Now, what Sukuna sensed was Mahoraga being summoned, but by the time he arrived there, Megumi had already been killed. That said, due to the nature of this ritual, his death was put on hold until the ritual was over, and the way it works is that the ritual isn't over until either Haruta dies or Mahoraga dies. Therefore, to save Fushiguro for his own plans, Sukuna had to keep Haruta alive, heal Megumi with reverse curse technique, bring him slightly back to life, and then kill the unkillable Shikigami. Of course, being the king of curses, that's exactly what he ended up doing, because by the time Mahoraga adapted to his slashes, Sukuna destroyed it in one shot with his flames. By the end of this fight, a huge chunk of Shibuya had already been torn apart by his domain, so when you factor in the flames as well, hundreds if not thousands of civilians must have died. Following this rampage, Sukuna then took Megumi to Shoko, who was healing sorcerers nearby, and at 11:14 PM, a traumatized Yuji then regains control. In this scene, he literally throws up thinking about everyone killed by Sukuna, but he does decide to keep on fighting just because he didn't want this to be his only contribution. Now, what Yuji didn't know is that 5 minutes earlier at 11:09 PM, Todo arrived in Shibuya along with Nita from the Kyoto school. Unlike literally everyone else, these two made it to the area where Gojo was sealed, but by the time they got there, the prison realm was long gone. For that reason, their mission changed from saving Gojo to helping their allies, and over 10 minutes later they found Itadori. By this point, Yuji had already lost the will to fight, as Mihito had done pretty much everything in his power to crush his soul. In particular, the curse finished off Nanami right in front of him, used random civilians in disgusting ways, and then worst of all, killed Kugisaki with his technique. All of this combined led to Yuji having a mental breakdown, but it was Todo's arrival that changed everything. As Nita took Kugisaki away with the promise that she has a non-0% chance of surviving, it was Todo who convinced Yuji to carry on, and his technique was so disorienting that it arguably played either the biggest or second biggest part in their victory. Despite Mahito's obvious talent and his ability to learn and grow faster than any curse, it was his wariness of Todo's technique that gave Yuji the opening to defeat him with Black Flash. It should be pointed out that during the fight, Todo lost his hand and therefore couldn't use his technique, but it didn't matter since he was still able to convince Mahito that the technique would still work. After taking this hit, Mahito had nothing left to defend himself, but before Itadori could end things, the fake Geto then showed up. From the start, this guy had always wanted Gojo out the way, but for a different reason than the rest of the group. From his point of view, the existence of cursed energy has potential to create something other than just sorcerers and cursed spirits. A century ago, Noritoshi tested that theory when he created the half-curse, half-human hybrids, but sadly, Chozo and his brothers didn't live up to expectations. In his words, everything he created was limited by his own potential, and so the solution is to create such a chaotic situation that even he can't control it. Doing this could lead to the birth of a new type of human, but to create this chaos in the first place, he first had to absorb Mahito. Thanks to Yuji beating him up, this was incredibly easy, and with the curse under his control, Fake Geto then combined him with a bunch of other cursed spirits. This move is known as a maximum technique, and in the case of Geto it's called Uzumaki, and the main benefit is that when you do this with a curse of Mahito's level, the user temporarily gains that curse's technique. With the ability to change people's souls, Noritoshi used it in a way that Mahito never could. For context, we know that Tengen has been alive for at least 1500 years, and during that time she's created several large barriers made from cursed energy. These barriers have various jobs, such as hiding the location of Jujutsu High and strengthening the curtains of other sorcerers. In this scene, what Noritoshi does is he hijacks one of Tengen's barriers, meaning that anyone inside this space can be affected by Mahito's technique. With this power, he targeted two specific types of non-sorcerers. The first type were people like Junpei, who were people born with cursed techniques, but without the body or the brain to use them. For these people, Noritoshi rewired their brains to turn them into real sorcerers, just like what Mahito did in the first season. The second type of non-sorcerer was a lot different, as it's people who've been forced to eat cursed objects. In particular, Noritoshi revealed that for the last 1,000 years, he's been secretly making deals with ancient sorcerers. When these ancient sorcerers died, their souls were then stored inside of cursed objects, just like Sukuna's finger, and the fake Geto has been feeding those objects to innocent people. One of these victims was Megami's stepsister Sumiki, but unlike Yuji, her body wasn't strong enough to be a vessel. To fix this, Noritoshi used Mahito's curse technique, meaning that now Sumiki and people like her will be in a similar situation to Itadori. Now, as if all of that wasn't enough, the fake Geto then confirmed he has plans to make all of these new sorcerers kill each other, to increase their understanding of cursed energy. Importantly, he doesn't reveal how he's forcing everyone to fight to the death, but the implication is that by making everyone have these battles, it'll lead to some kind of evolution for humanity. Moving on, the fake Geto then finally leaves Shibuya after giving his big speech, but as he does this, he releases at least 10 million cursed spirits. Not only did this allow him to escape with the prison realm without much trouble, but it forced the sorcerers and the government to put all their focus on helping civilians. In fact, in the anime, we see some unknown low-level politicians debating how to react, as the curses cause mass chaos in every corner of Tokyo. During this chaos, millions of people were evacuated, and the main job of the sorcerers was to protect those civilians while dealing with as many curses as possible. On top of that, to explain the need for the evacuation in the first place, the existence of cursed spirits was made public for the first time, although the government doesn't exactly tell the whole truth. The story that the evacuees were told was that cursed spirits only appear in Tokyo, and this was a strategy so that all of people's negative emotions and their negative cursed energy, it would be drawn to this one city, rather than spreading across the whole country. Naturally, the destruction of Tokyo also had a bad impact for Japan's economy, with Mei selling off all of her Japanese assets. Using her brother's technique, they were able to escape the country a lot earlier after coming dangerously close to being killed by the fake Geto. Finally, within Jujutsu society itself, the higher-ups made 5 important declarations. With Geto seemingly being alive, the first declaration was that his death penalty was reinstated. Back in 2007, he was originally given the death penalty, but obviously Gojo chose not to kill him, and Yuki kinda just does her own thing and doesn't follow orders from Jujutsu High. Therefore, there wasn't really anyone else who could kill him, and so he was able to operate for 10 years just doing his own thing. The second declaration was that Gojo is an accomplice to everything that happened in Shibuya, and not only is he expelled from Jujutsu society, but any attempt to free him is a crime. To put it simply, this rule was only made because the higher-ups were sick of him, since he frequently went against their wishes, interfered with politics, and saved whoever he wanted. By them making it appear that he was somehow responsible for Shibuya, the higher-ups were basically trying to preserve their own power, even if it meant sorcerers losing their greatest weapon. Anyhow, the third declaration was that Principal Yaga was sentenced to death, and this makes sense when you consider that he was the teacher to the 2 sorcerers currently being painted as villains. Lastly, the fourth and fifth declarations were that with Gojo being gone, Yuji is now set to be executed immediately, and Yuta Okotsu is his executioner. I'm sure most of you watching know who this is, but just in case you might not, Yuta Okotsu is a special grade sorcerer who was the protagonist of the JJK movie. On screen now should be a direct link to my review of that, so please check it out if you're interested, and for everyone else, thank you so much for watching. This is my first video of the year, so I'd really appreciate any comments, likes, and subscriptions as I'm trying to hit 500k subs in 2025. Until the next one, peace out.